Welcome to another edition of Trail Runner Nation. My name is Don Freeman.
I'm Adam Kimble.
And I'm Scott Warr. This is the second episode of a three-part series where we're talking about Ryan Holiday's powerful book, The Obstacle is the Way, the ancient art of turning adversity to advantage. And as we've been reading this book, it has some direct correlations to training and racing ultras. So we thought, hey, this seems like a good book that we should do. So we split it up, as Ryan Holiday did, into 3 podcast episodes. He has 3 sections. Those sections are perception, action, and will. The first episode we did, we released a few weeks ago, and it's entitled Perception, Turning Obstacles into Opportunities. I'll link that in the show notes. But in this episode, we're going to focus on the second step, how action is essential for overcoming adversity. From understanding the difference between reaction and deliberate action to learning how failure can pave the way to success. We'll discuss how persistence, planning, and process help turn obstacles into opportunities. So the first question I want to throw out to you guys, reaction versus action. Let's define both of those. Which is better, or is one of them better? Reaction versus action.
Well, I think it depends on what the reaction is. Is your reaction quit, go away, give up? Or is your action dig down, reach deep into your experience and your will and move forward? So what is that reaction? And what kind of action takes place with that reaction? So I think a tough question, but disassembled that way, you can't have a wrong answer. So that's why I took it.
Yeah, I have a similar response to that, Don. And I think one of the first things that Ryan Holiday talks about in this section of the book is how there's action and then there's right action. So if your action is just to have action that doesn't have intention, then maybe reaction is better. But if it's intentional action in order to help you achieve what you're trying to achieve, then that might be better than reaction. So situational for sure.
Well, as you're talking about, I'm thinking there's 2 types of reaction. There's involuntary reaction. You trip on a rock and your arms automatically go out to protect yourself. That's an involuntary reaction. There's no thinking involved. Whereas there is voluntary reaction, or I would say probably more deliberate action. If things are going poorly, you deliberately make a decision to act. And so I would say for the most part, an involuntary reaction is there to keep us safe and to keep us alive. Whereas a deliberate action takes some consideration or some thought or some pondering that goes into it. What do you think of that?
Well, I think that's a good point. I don't think there's been this book was written for trail running. I mean, as you read through it, you go, yes, yes, yes. I can see that working in my life for my career, for my family, for my friend group, but really it all comes back to the same thing where we talk about trail running. Ultra running is a microcosm of life. This book really hits the head. It can apply to anything. And it really boils down to those principles. What's your perception? Where do you see yourself in this? Do you have control of it? And then the actions you take, even if it's a successful move or a failure, it was a move and you learned something from it. And then next podcast, when we talk about will, I'm sure that it will tie it all together. But I was really engaged in this section, action, because it's so important.
Yeah, I'm discovering that the more I learn about Stoicism and the Stoics, that basically are sort of the foundation of this book, the more I recognize how applicable it is to my life, both to my life as an endurance athlete and my life in general. I just think there's so many actionable items. We're talking about action today. And just so many things that you can use and you say, oh, I maybe haven't thought about it that way before, but that is a perfect way to address the obstacles that I have in my life and try to overcome them.
As we talk about deliberate action, there's a reason why Ryan Holiday put these 3 steps in the order that they are in. Perception. if something has happened to us or we're in a situation, how we perceive that, and as we step away, like the Stoics, teach, step away and look at it as what it really is. What do you have control over? What don't you have control over? And then step 2 is now take action that is going to be beneficial, hopefully beneficial. And I think in trail running, that's what we need to do. If you're having leg cramps, you need to take a perceptive approach. What's going on with my leg cramps? What do I have control over? What don't I have control over? Well, one of the things you have control over is how fast you're going. And you can say, okay, one of the actions I'm going to take is to slow down. And hopefully that will take care of the problem that you're in. So I think that there's a reason why Ryan starts with perception, because it gives us time to think about the situation we're in, or the situation that has been brought to us. And then we have the ability to look at the options that are involved and then act upon those.
Yeah, I think we're always in some kind of action, whether it's just being still and walking away, that's an action, or taking and tearing the problem apart and analyzing it and saying, as Scott said, I just need to slow down a bit here, refuel, and change these shoes. There's some things you can do to make the situation a little bit better. And if all you do is focus on the chaos, then that's what all you're going to see. But you've got to take it a step at a time and start tearing down the problem and fixing it, and having confidence that, because of my ingenuity, my creativity, I can get through this. And that's the great thing about long runs, is that there's ups and downs all the way through. It's going to change. How many times do you hear people say, it'll get better? Because it does. The body is great at that, because we make those changes. We take action.
Yeah.
We were just talking about, before we hit record, Adam and I were talking about marathon running, and I saw a quote, and I'm going to paraphrase this, I'll probably murder it, and I can't remember who said it. Somebody out there probably has seen the same quote.
Hey,
thanks for sharing. Thanks for sharing this, Scott.
Scott, it's not plagiarism if you don't remember who said it.
Good point, Adam.
And it may not. I may be even making it up, but they said something to the effect like a marathon is going into a place of discomfort and hell and maintaining it to the end of the race. An ultra, you go to the same place, but you have time to come out of it, enjoy, and then maybe you go back into it multiple times during the race. And I thought that was really interesting about that. So
I just yesterday I was talking to one of my athletes, Scott, and I was telling she's preparing for a race that I direct. It's a stage race in the Namib Desert in Namibia. And I was
wait, you direct a race in Namibia?
I do, in Africa, yeah, Southern Africa.
You're kidding?
Yeah. It's
I didn't know that.
It's a multi-stage. What? It's a multi-stage race. Five stages. It's 155-ish miles over 5 stages. My friend Chris, who I ran across Great Britain with, I know we've talked about that. He's the owner of this company, and there's races all over, but the one that I direct every year is called the Desert Ultra in Namibia. So this athlete of mine, Rose, she's preparing for this race, and I was telling her one of the funniest shirts that I've ever seen at a race was someone was wearing a shirt and it said, "Things are going poorly, it's going to get better." And then right below it said, "Things are going great, it's going to get worse." I was like, that's ultra running for you, man.
Well, one of the things that this section is full of stories about action, and I loved a lot of the stories. I learned a little bit more about Amelia Earhart and, of course, Theodore Roosevelt. And there are a couple quotes that I'm gonna mention. Roosevelt has a quote that says, "For us is the life of action." So that's what life is about, is action, not inaction. And then Amelia Earhart, on her plane, she had a motto that was painted on her plane. She says, "Always think with your stick forward," meaning you can go ahead and think, but you need to be doing something. You need to be moving forward. And boy, how important is that in running ultras? You know, if you're going through a bad spell and you need to figure things out, go ahead and figure it out. But make sure your stick is forward. Make sure you're still moving towards the goal. I love that.
Yeah, I love that as well. One of the things I loved about this section is that discussion on getting moving and taking action. I think I've found in my life, and I'm sure you guys have found this as well, I think there's just been so many situations I've encountered where I've been in a position to take action on something and maybe didn't feel totally prepared to do it, or for whatever reason it didn't. Like I could have waited longer. It would have maybe made sense to wait longer on something, but instead I just kind of dove in and said, I'll figure this out as I go. It's one of the reasons that my wife and I are such great partners. I'm the like jump off the cliff guy, and she's the I'll figure out how to get us to land. But
she's standing on the cliff throwing a parachute, hoping it catches you, because the guy left without his parachute.
Exactly. But I don't think just taking idiotic action is the way to go. But I think the point here is the point that Ryan Holiday is trying to make is the more actions you can take, the more doors that are going to open, the more things that are going to get moving. Instead of, a lot of times we can convince ourselves, no matter what it is, we can convince ourselves to not take action because it's easier to not do that and come up with excuses why we shouldn't do it yet. Whereas if you just get started and get moving, then the process begins and you start to figure things out as you go.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, Adam. And I, that thought went through my head as I was listening and not reading through this book, because it's available in audio too. And I like that because you can consume it in many different places. And the getting going, doing something is so important. Just to sit back and change nothing it seems safe because nothing will change. It'll all be the same. I'm still alive. I'm enduring this problem, whatever it is. And so it'll be the same tomorrow and the next day, but I'm still okay. There's risk when you try something new. There's a risk of it never changing. There's a risk that it may get worse. But if you don't do anything, it's a safe spot. You're in that spot and it's okay. And I think that's what cripples a lot of people is they don't move out of that comfort zone. Even though it's not good, it's not going to kill them.
Yeah, this is jumping ahead a little bit, but it's just really relevant to what you said there, Don. Ryan talks about at some point how great entrepreneurs have these different sort of like abilities to handle things. It's like they never get too embarrassed. They're never afraid to lose a bit, like some of their investment, things like that. And to me, I think similar to the taking action, to me, I think it comes down to it's a humility thing. A lot of times I think people are afraid of maybe how they'll be perceived if they do something and it doesn't go well or they fail or whatever. Whereas if you can just train yourself to take action and say, this is just part of a bigger picture, then you're going to learn and grow. And whether it goes really well or doesn't, you're going to learn from it and be better positioned to succeed more in the future. And so I think it's just, I love that idea of put yourself out there, get your toes in the water, and then figure things out as you go, even if it's not perfect, even if you don't execute it perfectly.
I have a story that is not running related, but I want to tell you that story and then bring it back to relate to running. Don and I are working on a project where we put out an MVP, or a minimum viable product. And that in software development, you don't want to come up with all of the solution with all the whistles and bells and invest that much time and effort to know that it's not going to resonate with a customer. You put out the minimum viable product and test it with the customers to see if it's good, and then you develop that from there. Well, Don and I and some friends came up with a minimum viable product, and we put it out there, and we got great success, got great feedback, but that's where it stopped. There was no action beyond that. We had lots of thoughts and ideas, but nothing ever happened. No action was taken. And we found that something else was developed very similar that was exactly what we envisioned, but they beat us to market. And so my question to you, Coach Adam, is, are we, as you coach athletes and they're getting fit and getting trained, is there a point where they just need to sign up for a race and go do it and experience it, not knowing whether they're 100% prepared for it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a difference between being unprepared or ill prepared for something and maybe not being experienced at something, right? Those are two very different things. And so you can be in a position where you can talk yourself in circles all day about why it'd be better to wait to do something. But at some point, I think you've just got to go for it. And in fact, that same conversation when I was telling you about the T-shirt from yesterday with my athlete, in this race that she's going to run, she's on one of those stages is going to be the furthest that she's ever run, and she's intimidated by that, rightfully so. It's a new distance she's never done before. But I told her, hey, this is really what it comes down to as you're moving up in distance. For me personally, and for a lot of the athletes that I've coached over the years, I've seen that it's really just a matter of doing the same thing, but shifting your mentality. So yeah, you're going further than you've ever gone before, but is this any different than what you did for a shorter distance? No, you're just doing it longer, and you have to continue to make these micro decisions to put yourself in a position to have success. And so you got to keep eating, you got to keep drinking, you got to keep taking care of your body, and you just have to do that for a longer period of time. So it's not reinventing the wheel. You're just doing the same thing and shifting your mind to say, I've got to do it for a longer period of time.
As you're talking about that, I'm remembering in the book where Ryan Holiday talks about Nick Saban's philosophy. He's the famous coach of the Alabama football team. And he has a lot of, if you ever want to go down a rabbit hole, Google Nick Saban quotes or philosophy, and you can just be inspired all day long. But one of the things that he is the foundation for his program is the focus on the process, the step by step, not looking at the scoreboard, not looking at, going to a bowl game or winning those bowl games, but it's the process of drilling it down to the play. How do we make this play and execute this play the best we can? And doing the process step by step. You take that to ultra running. You go into an aid station, let's say, and you're not feeling well. What's the action? It's to take the next step. Get some food, maybe sit down for a minute, rest, but then take the next step, the action to follow the process. The process is one foot in front of the other. The process is go aid station to aid station. It's not focused wholly on that finish line, regardless of whether, as per your athlete, you've never gone that far. Well, you've taken a step, right? Keep taking a step and take that fear of the unknown out and focus on the process.
Yeah, I think he says replace fear with the process in this section.
Oh, yeah. I actually had that written down. You're absolutely right. Yeah. Replace the fear with the process.
Yeah. That actually, you guys know I like to relate things to baseball as a former baseball player. But one thing that makes me think of is, when I was playing in college baseball, sometimes you'd be going through a slump where you just weren't hitting well, you weren't seeing the ball well. It's funny, baseball is one of those very cerebral sports where when things are going well, you're just taking action, not thinking. It's just like secondary, like you're just almost unconscious behavior. And then when things aren't going well, you're overthinking everything. And so I like to think about that example where you have this fear of, well, I'm not playing well, I'm going to make these mistakes, I'm doing this or that. And you have to move that to the side and replace that with, these are the fundamentals. I've been playing this sport for X number of years. I've been doing these same things over the course of these years. And I've gotten in my head about it, and I need to go back and focus on those fundamentals. And then that's going to get me back to where it all feels natural again.
What is that called? There's a word for that in baseball when you're in a slump. What's that called? The heebie-jeebies, or there's
the yips, maybe the yips.
The yips, yeah, the yips. Yeah. Okay, go ahead, Don. I'm trying to think. What is that called? The yips. That's right.
No, that's the question I was going to ask Scott.
Oh, it is?
No. No. So what are you saying, Adam? Is that baseball is kind of a microcosm of life? Is that what you're sharing with us?
I am saying that. Yeah. It's. I think like that. What I love about this particular section we're talking about now with the process is again, it applies to every aspect of life where we can be taking right actions on a daily basis, and then all these external or internal, whatever, fears can sort of start to blind us. And at some point, you have to remove that from the situation, the same way we talked about in the first section about removing emotion from your decision making, and focus on the actions in front of you and how you can forward yourself in your life.
I think that we could do an entire episode, probably an entire podcast series on the process. I mean, as I was listening to that, I'm thinking process is everything. And, any problem that obstacle that you're trying to overcome, you've got to implement some type of forward moving process to see the problem, identify it, and then overcome it. Go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, it's funny. So first of all, I'm going to encourage the audience listening to do something here. If there is a book that you've been reading that you really enjoy, I'm going to encourage everybody to just talk about it with somebody, because I've found, you guys, that all of the reviews and the episodes that we put out about different books, I end up telling, I don't know how many, but let's say hundreds of people about the stuff. And I think the more that if there's something that really hits you and that you really appreciate from a book, I think you should share it, because it just opens up this portal into all these ideas. But that brings me back to what I was going to say, Don. That makes me think a lot about the episode that we did on Atomic Habits, the book by James Clear, and how when he talks about, so in our discussion here about forward motion and movement, he talks about forming habits, similar to what Scott said earlier about the your project with the minimum viable product. He's all about don't say, I'm going to do all these different things and try to make that a habit. You have to start with the simplest form of the thing. So with running, the example he gives is, don't say I'm going to run for an hour every day. Say I'm going to put on my running shoes and just see where that leads you, right? So it's kind of stripping away the stuff that dilutes things and just getting down to the most basic action, and then doing that and repeating that and seeing where that leads you.
They talk about the process. Nick Saban, talking about his success, boils down to the process. He doesn't start with the team of, we're going to go to the national championships. He starts with the team of saying, we're going to finish every rep that we're doing here in the gym. We're going to do complete every practice free throw shot. If you can do that, then we can win a championship. But you can't.
Is that what you do in football? Is practice free throw shots?
Yeah, it's
He's a football coach, Freeman.
Scott, obviously,
if he's teaching his football team to make free throws, that's the wrong process. Let's make that clear. The process has to be related to the task at hand.
It's a good thing we're friends, Scott. It's a good thing we're friends.
Nick Saban's secret is that he was having his football players shoot free throws. That was the secret.
Adam, you don't need to jump in on this. You don't need to help him. He's doing just fine by himself. So back to Coach Saban.
What was your point? Sorry. What was your point?
My point is that you need to, if you're, let me throw this in there, because it was mentioned in the book. If you're pinned down on a mat trying to get up, and someone's on your shoulders providing resistance, and you can't get up, you can't instantly see yourself standing next to him on the mat. You've got to slowly take the process. I've got to move this arm out from underneath me. I've got to bring my elbow up and push up to make a little more room for my hip so I can throw my leg. There's a process to standing up, and you've got to break problems down to process, because when you can do that, it's manageable. Now, what I couldn't do was manage myself out of the process of identifying football players doing free throws. That I couldn't do.
Well,
there's a section in the book where Ryan Holiday specifies the steps of that process. And if you're listening to the audiobook, it's at 4 minutes and 59 seconds in the chapter called Process.
Nice flex.
But here's the 4 steps. First step is don't panic. Don't panic. Conserve your energy. Number 2, focus on not making it worse. Mm-hmm. Number 3, create some breathing room or some space. And number 4, observe the problem and begin taking action. And I thought that was a good step-by-step. Maybe I should write that on my forearm when I go out for a run or a race. Don't panic, conserve your energy. Okay, got that. Focus on not making it worse. Okay, I'm not going to make it any worse. Create some breathing room or some space, give it some time, and then observe what the problem is and start making or taking action.
Yeah, I think emotion requires energy, and you've got to put all your
Right.
energy in moving forward. You don't need to spend energy, worrying. You need to spend your energy being creative and figuring out a way out. But don't worry about your time. Don't worry about your position, because that's not going to change by worrying. The only way to make it change is to find a solution, and there is a solution to most problems.
Yeah, that's a great point, Don. On that note, one thing I like to talk about when people are going into races, I like to say it's kind of like with willpower in everyday life, right? I have my cousin, he's big on automating certain parts of his life so that, little things like have the coffee maker ready so I don't have to think about what I'm going to drink in the morning, stuff like that. It's similar, I think, in running a race where you don't want to be using up your brain energy and the sort of the willpower that you need when you need it most, when you're struggling the most, doing on mundane tasks like, what am I going to get at the next aid station? You need to have that stuff set ahead of time, have your crew asking you questions to get that out of you, as opposed to you wasting that energy when you are going to need it at a much more important time in the race later.
Yeah, it makes you think, or makes me think of Steve Jobs, black T-shirt, pair of jeans, pair of New Balance shoes. I mean, that's what he was going to wear. No time to think about, what's for today. Why start off the day with a decision on what to put on when you know what it's going to be?
Or what? Put your running kit out the night before, so that you don't have to take action and say, okay, where's my shirt? Where's my shorts? Where's my shoes? Put it out so that your first action is put it on. Make things easier to take action. I love that. That's a great idea.
Would either one of you ever sleep in your running kit to save time? I think that's kind of like bad luck. I mean,
for early race start times, absolutely.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to spend that much time in that gear. I want to be fresh when it comes on. I think that would be just a thing you shouldn't do, like wearing your new running shoes to the store. No, those are for the trail. You don't put bad juju on those running shoes by stepping in some gum or just giving them casual everyday experiences. These shoes are an elite piece of equipment that's developed for the trail, and that's where it belongs. Do you have that kind of relationship with your shoes, Adam?
I do. I also another faux pas. So I also would never wear my kit to sleep before the race.
Yeah, good.
And I think another faux pas. And no judgment on anyone that's done this before, but whenever I see somebody wearing a race T-shirt in the race, I'm like, oh no, please no.
I had a guy in a race that he was having a hard time. When you can find somebody having a hard time, the look. I mean, we've all been there. And I look back and he was wearing his race shirt for that race that day, and I said, "Bro." I gave him that piece of information.
Yeah, I
wonder. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, you're like, hey, I don't know if you've run shirtless before, but now's the right time.
That's right.
I wonder if that unwritten taboo rule has filtered down to the new runners, if they know that or not, if that's something that needs to be handed down. That is, I think, one of the first things I ever learned. I ran I think it was a Thanksgiving turkey trot 10K. And
is that really a race? Is that a real race?
It is.
Okay, go ahead.
And I went and picked up my shirt, and somebody that was a veteran, it was the first race I'd ever run, said, "Oh, by the way, don't wear that tomorrow. It's no bueno to wear that shirt during the race." And I went, "Oh, really?" Because I was going to.
Oh, on faux pas or like things you should.
Maybe that's a good one.
I love that idea.
All right, let's each come up with 5. Let's write them down, and then let's compare notes. Make sure we.
And listeners, if you can think of a faux pas, send that in. Comment on the. I want to shift this a little bit. So we've talked about action and process, and I have this. It may be the title of the podcast. I don't know, but failure is a feature. Action and failure are two sides of the same coin. So just by taking action doesn't guarantee that you're going to be successful. There could be, and probably should be, some failure involved. What do you guys think of that? Where does your mind take you when we talk about action and failure?
Well, I'll jump in first and say, I think what attracts all of us to a hard sport, whether it's, kayaking or trail running, is there's risk. There's not a guaranteed win. In fact, what makes it fun and exciting is maneuvering and figuring a way through some of that risk, and then finding yourself in a tough spot and then telling the story how you got out of it. I mean, that's the glory and the fun of participating in a sport with high risk. Talk to the people that surf, talk to the people that free climb up a face of a mountain. And talk about a football player doing free throw shots. There's risk that things aren't going to go well.
Free climbing up a mountain, there's some risk there if you fail, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
oh, go ahead,
no,
Adam.
No worries. I was just going to jump in real quick and say there was a quote that Ryan Holiday uses from Wendell Phillips that says, "What is defeat? Nothing but education, nothing but the first steps to something better." And I just love that because it's true. I think doing something and not doing well at it, or not succeeding, or not achieving what you set out to do is not glamorous, but there's always something to be gleaned from it, something to make you better, something to position you to have success later on. And I think if you have this is something I've been trying to cultivate in my own life, is having more of a, I guess just seeing through a lens of the bigger picture, right? And not letting any one thing make me feel a certain way, and recognizing that it's all part of the bigger picture and it's all leading me down this path that I'm going down, and hopefully just contributing to greater success down the line.
Why do you think that we have such negative connotations to failure? We should anticipate failure. If we try something and we're not successful, we should benefit from that, right? Why do you suppose we fear failure? Why do you suppose that we don't celebrate failure?
I think to some degree it's cultural. Just the environment that many of us have been raised in. I don't know. Maybe that's not true. That immediately my mind went to, there's this story, and I might be wrong on the person here, but the name that's coming to my mind is Sammy Wanjiru, who is a former professional marathoner. I think it was him, but he had won some of the major marathons back a couple decades ago, maybe a little more recent than that. And anyway, I think he had just won the Boston Marathon, and he was getting interviewed, and he had a translator. And they basically asked him, how were you feeling? Were you nervous about the race? That sort of thing. And then his translator said the question to him, and there was like some confusion, and they couldn't figure out what was going on. But what ended up happening was he wasn't familiar with the concept of getting nervous before an event. And so there was no issue with the translator. He just didn't know what they were saying. And I think in where he was raised, he wasn't taught, this is a big deal, you need to be nervous about this, put a lot of pressure on yourself. It was just go run this race. And so I think to some degree it's the environment that you're in. And I think in the US at least, it's not as celebrated to fail. I think, it's more about successes, and people are nervous to trip and fall. And to me, I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah, Adam, I think you are exactly right when you just came right out and said, failure, we don't have a good relationship. It's a cultural thing. We don't have a good relationship with failure. We see it as negative. We see it as, you're a loser if you fail. And we don't have that cultural relationship of, it's okay if you fail. Like, pat you on the back. You failed. Okay, now this wasn't the way, and you need to go another way so you can find success. And so I think culturally we have, put a negative connotation on the word failure, when it's actually something that can be the path to, figuring out the destination you want to go.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Don. It also, that makes me wonder, and I'll pose this question aloud to both of you. Do you think the highest performers in any venue, in any area of life, do you think the majority of them have just learned taught themselves how to have a better relationship with failure? Or do you think they've been in an environment with other people that have helped cultivate in them? It's like iron sharpens iron. Are they just around people that are bringing out the best in them, or have they trained themselves, do you think?
Yeah, nature, nurture for failure, right? Is that what you're kind of thinking? Are you
Yep.
born with that, or do you observe it and learn it? Go ahead, Scott. I saw you leaning forward.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think it's a combination. I think there's a personality trait that people just let, like water roll off a duck's back, right? But I think that having a good coach, Coach Adam Kimble, can also instill a new relationship. I think you can change your relationship with failure, and having a mentor, a friend, a running partner, a good coach can help you change that relationship.
That's great. I completely agree. And it makes me think about when I talk with people about mental strength or perseverance, I tell a lot of people that I think that is something that some people I think are more naturally inclined towards. I think there's some people that can suffer a little better just naturally, but it is something that needs to be trained. So it's simultaneously something that someone could, be geared a little bit more towards, but it's also something you have to put yourself in the arena in order to get better at it.
One of the stories that I learned in this book that I'd never even heard this story is from World War II, real story of, I think it was British General Rommel, who was sent to Africa to fight the Germans.
Well, that's nice, Scott, but this wasn't football and a free throw. Rommel was with the German army. Did I get something wrong twice in one episode?
I think you're wrong.
Germans.
No,
Okay,
I think Rommel was a British guy. I'm going to go back and find out. Anyway,
I'll be looking right now. Go ahead.
Go fact check me, Freeman. But anyway, here's the story that I remember from the book: is General Rommel was sent to Africa to fight against the Germans because they needed to learn how to fight the Germans on a field of play where failure didn't have as huge a consequence, and so that they could take the lessons they learned from failure in Africa and translate those to when they were fighting the Germans in Europe. So they actually learned how to fight the Germans successfully in Africa, and then take those learnings and bring them to Europe so that they didn't fail as much and could be successful and fight against the new way that the Germans were conducting war. And I think from a running standpoint, we need to put ourselves in a training situation, out on a training run, and anticipate failure and a learning curve and plan for it in our training. And you could probably even say in some of our other, beginning races, use those, anticipate the failure, plan for it, anticipate it, and use it as a learning opportunity so that when you get to your A race or, a race that's more important to you, that you are more successful.
Well, there is balance in the universe, Scott. It's 1-to-1. That I was caught incorrect, and now you've tied the score because General Rommel was a German field marshal during World War II, popularly known as the Desert Fox. Thank you, Wikipedia. 1-to-1.
Well, it was the guy that was fighting against Rommel then. That's what it was.
But the story still holds. Very true. It was Winston Churchill.
Touche, Freeman.
Winston Churchill sent his men over to fight Rommel in North Africa so they wouldn't lose in Europe and create a negative presence or opinion of how capable they were.
Yeah, and that to me also speaks a lot to sort of your perception, the power of perception, right? Just because it was like, we got to get a victory, because if we lose in this one place, then that's going to change how everybody views this. Again, I'm going to do this. I promise this will be the last one in this episode. I'm going to do one more baseball analogy. I was literally just watching a game a couple days ago, a baseball game, and I'll try to make this brief. But there was the bases were loaded. There was 2 outs. If you know nothing about baseball, 3 outs ends the inning. So there was 2 outs. The batter at the plate had a 3-0 count. So one more ball and they would walk in a run. And the runner on third inexplicably tried to steal home, which is a rare thing, and got thrown out. So it was a situation where probably the pitcher would have walked in a run. Instead, this base runner made a mistake, got thrown out at home. And it was one of those situations where, and the reason I'm bringing this up is I was talking about this in the moment to my wife, and then I told my parents later because they know how much I love baseball. It was one of those situations where nothing really happened. It was early in the game. It could have been inconsequential, but it just shifted the momentum so much that the team that made the mistake, then the next inning, the game shifted and they ended up losing by a bunch of runs. And I think if that didn't happen, they very easily could have won the game. And it was one of those things where, to this example about the battles here, I think just the perception of, even if losing a small battle in a big war wasn't the worst thing, the perception of it could have made it the worst thing. And so I think it's really interesting that they took this approach of, let's fight in a different place, so that it changes how everybody views the situation. I just think it speaks to the power of how we frame things and look at different situations.
Yeah, we talked earlier before we hit record about a great friend of ours, Lee McKinley. And I remember, and he's a great runner and has done, some amazing things, a great mentor. But one of the things he said was, everybody should win a race somewhere. I don't care where you have to go or how far down the rankings in the race you need to go run to win it, but you need to experience a win. And it may change everything moving forward of finding some success, like the British troops and Allied forces in North Africa against General Rommel, the Desert Fox. Sometimes you have to go somewhere else to get that victory.
Yeah, that's a great point. And kind of to flip sort of to the opposite of that, Ryan Holiday talks when it comes to failure. He says, afterwards, you have to ask yourself, what went wrong? What can be improved? What am I missing? And I think sometimes it's important to get those wins. I also think sometimes it can actually be better for us to not get the win or to fail, because inherently we are going to assess things more when that happens. When things go well, you might be like, great, and not really reflect on it as much as you could have. So I think in that regard, we really can make ourselves a lot better when we take our failures and learn and grow from them.
Yeah, so, and I wrote this down earlier when we were talking about it, is failure. There's 2 L's that come right after that word. Is that failure? Are you a loser because of failure, or are you a learner because of failure? Mm-hmm. And if you've learned something, then you've gained, you've won. You're going to come across that same problem, guaranteed, again.
Yep.
And you can call back to it. Experiences, when you race somebody that's been there and done that, they can solve the problem as they go through. If you're a newbie, you might have something that they've already solved in the past. And so are you a loser or a learner from your failures? And it's encouraging to take failure on with that kind of perspective. Mm-hmm. That if you look at all the amazing success stories, whether they're a runner, an inventor, a business person, relationship, whatever, there's always failure in the process that's hardened them, that's giving them, that person, experience to tell the great story or accomplish the great things. If they didn't have those losses on the journey, then they never would have gotten there. It was those key moments that hardened them and made them who they are, that we celebrate that person.
Yeah, and I think I love that point, Don. And I think that's another thing. Maybe kind of this goes back to the discussion about how we as a society, our relationship with failure. I think similarly, our relationship with success is such that you see success and you're attracted to that, but you don't, unless you get into deep dive conversations like this, you don't necessarily discuss all the things, all the roadblocks that led to that success. it's easy to just say, this is the glorious part. Let's focus on that and not think about all of the roadblocks that really cultivated that success. And I think it's more important to look at those and to extract what it was that allowed that person or that group or whoever to eventually have that big success.
So I'm going to pose this question to both of you. You've got $1 million in your hand. Boom, it just showed up. Now you have an option of defining and describing how you received this $1 million. Number one, you play the lottery and somebody handed it to you. Number two, you worked through a process and you had wins and losses and you scraped your way to get that $1 million. Which one would you rather? You're defining your life. You get to pick whichever journey you're going to be on. Which would it be?
I don't know about telling the story, but I would rather have the second story because it could be repeatable. Because I've learned and I know that I could do it again versus the chance of winning the lottery again. I'd rather have the second one because the process allowed me to learn so that I could do it over and over and over and over again. Repeatable.
Yeah, for me, it's a same outcome, slightly different reasoning. I think it's just that this is a cliche, but all of the most valuable experiences in my life or relationships or whatever have all taken hard work. I don't think I would have the appreciation for those people or those things or those situations had it not been for that hard work. If it had just been handed to me, I just don't think I would feel the same way about it, if that makes sense.
Oh, it does make sense. And I'm with you. I would want to earn it. I would feel like that was a valuable experience. I did this instead of I was given this.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have a lot of value. It's not a real story to tell. And even if the story is just telling yourself, I did this on my last day, on my exit. I did that from nothing. I created that. It was my dream, and here it is. But to have somebody hand it, I feel like I took a shortcut. It would be like winning the race because you found a way to cut the course in half. It's like, yeah, you won, but you didn't earn it. You didn't have the experience of the tough climb. And when you get to the end of the race and you've won and people are saying, yeah, but how about that one climb? You know that spot when you thought you were done and it turned and there was another set of hills? Yeah, remember that? And you're like, yeah, I kind of do remember that. Not. So, I would want to earn it.
There's one idea in this section that I don't know whether I understood, and so hopefully you guys can remember this part in the section and can clarify and help me understand it. He says in Stoicism that sometimes you need to use the obstacle against itself. That sometimes standing still might be the answer. Sometimes moving sideways or backwards works. So how can we use the obstacle against itself to make it to be more successful?
I love that you said this, Scott, because I almost brought up this exact idea earlier. When we were talking about the importance of taking action, I was going to say, but there are some situations, I know it sounds contradictory, but there are some situations where the right action is inaction. Not in the sense that you're not doing anything, but in the sense that there may be, the way I understand it, there may be obstacles in your path that will have a way of removing themselves, but they'll remove themselves through your patience of allowing them to remove themselves. So again, it's a situational thing where you've got to assess it on a by case basis, but that was the way I understood it. Was there's times when the best thing you can do is allow these things that are creating a roadblock to move out of the way and then take the action that you need to take.
So as Don and if you've listened to the podcast know, I struggle with cramping when I'm running longer runs. And so what you just said makes more sense to me if I'm correlating this to cramping. Cramping is the obstacle. And when that obstacle manifests itself to me, sometimes the inaction of, okay, slow down and give it time is the solution. And it actually gives me better results, not just for the cramping, but it gives my body a chance to rest, so that when the cramps go away, or when the slowing down has its effect physiologically on me, when I get through that or around that obstacle, I'm better for it. So by using the obstacle as inaction or slowing down, there's a positive result.
Yeah, now, as you said that, Scott, it made me start to think that, that obstacle of cramping and working and finding that solution might have been not just slowing down, but changing your electrolytes, your fluid, your fueling, changing that. And when you change that and you've overcome that obstacle of cramping, a number of other things improve too, like your pace, like your time, like your enjoyability, because that obstacle of cramping was the kingpin, that one spot that you needed to change then to move to the next level and become, reach your potential. You had to solve
guys,
that to really reach your potential, because yeah, go.
No, I 100% agree, Don. I think I was just going to say, as a father of a 3-year-old, earlier this week my daughter turned 3, and a 1-year-old. I think another good analogy here for me, at least, is I like to think of it as sometimes when things are going crazy with my kids, or they're, they've got a chaotic energy. Sometimes I can feel like I need to meet them with that same energy. It's like meet chaos with chaos. When in reality, the absolute best thing I can do is the opposite of that. So it's almost like have an inaction of, I'm not going to respond to this with the way that I feel naturally inclined to. Instead, I'm going to let this energy fizzle out and approach you with something else. I think that's another version of what we're talking about here.
And another thing that I learned in this book is a story about Arthur Ashe, right? Famous African-American tennis player. And he was very successful. And Ryan coined the phrase, I don't know if he coined it or Arthur Ashe coined the phrase, but he explained that the way Arthur Ashe acted on the court, he didn't throw temper tantrums like other famous tennis players. And he said that the way that he was successful is by being physically loose, but mentally tight. And if you think about that, think about physically loose and mentally tight. He kept his composure. He kept his mental capabilities were so controlled and disciplined, but yet physically he was able to do things and stay loose. And as I think of that, there is an opposite to that of someone that I'm thinking of that's popular in running. That is the actual complete opposite of that.
His catchphrase, yeah.
And if you don't know what it is, ask a friend, because I'm not going to say his name. But I that's what I thought about when I read this. I go, who was more successful? I think Arthur Ashe taught us all and was very successful at what he did.
Yeah, that made me think of it's another classic example, but just given that the Olympics are not too far in the rearview mirror, when you look at the 100-meter dash is kind of the quintessential event, right? And you watch, I love when they do the slow motion and you're watching in the most tense race of these runners' lives, and their body is so relaxed. It's just like it's such an interesting dichotomy of all this tension and all this looseness combined into one situation. And I just love that so much. It's like they've literally trained themselves to be as relaxed as they possibly can, running the hardest that they possibly can.
Oh, that's interesting. Very interesting.
One of my favorite stories that we've talked around, but we've got to bring it up, is the story about the 5,000 acres in Guatemala and Honduras, a place to grow bananas. And this property was owned by two different deed holders, and they both felt that they were the rightful owners. And the 5,000 acres were up for sale against the United Fruit Company, very powerful, very big American company with all the resources they would need, competing against a startup with not a whole lot of resources. and there was an argument of who owns this land. And so the United Fruit Company went out with all their resources, high-end lawyers, collected every piece of paper in the country they could find to prove who owns this. Meanwhile, the startup thinks another way. He goes out and meets individually with both owners, pays them their asking price, and ends up being the owner because
he pays both of them.
He paid them both.
Yeah.
So that was his way, and probably paid less than United Fruit Company going out and trying to find a way to legally get it. So sometimes thinking out of the box a little bit, thinking differently of there's another way to get this done. And that was a very nice story.
The Stoics, and Ryan mentioned this in that section, is we need to flow like water. When you hit an obstacle, think of yourself as water rather than trying to blow through the obstacle. Move around it.
Yeah.
Move around it. Go to the side. Divert yourself, and eventually you'll get to your successful goal.
And that reminds me of the saying that I heard many, many years ago, Scott Jurek saying, you run down the hill like you're water. Make your path like you're looking for the easiest place to step and go, and run like water runs.
Guys, I'm trying to remember. I know Don used this example earlier, so I feel like it was from this book. Was it in this book where Ryan Holiday talks about if somebody's laying on top of you, like you were saying, Don, where your reaction is to meet that with tension and try to move out, but the best thing you can do is relax and then kind of work your way out of it that way? It's the same thing. Sometimes I think sometimes, again, it's like many things. I think it's something that needs to be trained. You have to train yourself in certain situations to say, my inclination is to meet this with a certain reaction, and instead I need to go with something that is going to kind of open up more doors for me.
You know, this has been a great discussion, and I'm going to wrap now with probably a final thought that comes out of this section.
Scott, hold that thought, because I know that I do not want to interrupt your flow running downhill like water.
Don's trying to be water
because I know your
now.
thoughts are always good. But I'm being water, and it's a problem comes at you. You identify it, and maybe instead of looking at it like, oh, I can't stand it that I have this problem, of rethinking it and saying, why has this problem been presented to me? What do I need to learn from it? And how can I become better for it? Maybe this problem is for me and not to me. How can I use this as a way to improve myself or improve people around me or set an example for others? How can this obstacle be my way?
Yeah, piggybacking off of that, this will be the last thing I say before you wrap things up.
Is it about baseball?
Yeah,
Is it baseball?
No, I told you. I stopped at two. I stopped at two. This was another thing that I loved is just the idea that everything is a chance to do and be your best. And I think if you take that approach, again, it's kind of like putting everything that's happened in the rearview mirror, putting everything in the future, like having the thought there, but not focusing on that, focusing on the present and what you can do right now.
I love it. You end up with knee pain. For instance, I have knee pain. And so because of that, you changed your running gait because you learned that you were overstriding, you were heel striking, you were had the wrong shoe, maybe your muscles weren't balanced, you need to stretch more. I've got knee pain. And because of the knee pain, it was an opportunity to learn from it. It was, and now because of it, I've got clean running form. It improves my longevity in the career. In fact, I'm a little bit faster and more efficient. So things that happen to us, maybe they're presented for a good reason. If we can look at it that way, I think that's a good perspective.
It is.
I agree.
Okay, so here's the final thought from that section that I thought is a great wrap for this episode, and that is, we need to take action. We've seen that through this section, action is important. You have to take action. Sometimes inaction is that action.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that action is failure and learn from failure. But here's the final thought. If there's nothing you can do for yourself, at least you can try to help others.
Mm.
So in your struggles, in your obstacles, if there's nothing that you can figure out or learn or do for yourself, at least you can help someone else.
I love that, Scott. And maybe instead of always being self-centered and thinking, what is this for me? Maybe it was presented to you then to extend that assistance to someone next to you. So it's not always about you, that it's about your community and your tribe. And maybe you were the person to sort through it and figure it out so you could then pass it on to somebody else because you were in the position and had all the information collected through your experiences to solve that, then to hand it off to the person that hadn't had that experience yet. So I like that, Scott, thinking through your community, and problems are opportunities.
And if you haven't had this experience, keep running, because I hope that you do. You're running down the trail and you're having an issue, and you come upon somebody that's also having a different issue, and you decide to help that person and say, hey, let's get to the next aid station together. Let's do this. And you help that other person. Sometimes that is exactly the answer to your obstacle, is by helping someone else and turning your selfish situation into an external action to help someone else. And in turn, you actually receive the benefit from that.
Yeah.
Nice.
Isn't that interesting? What a great analogy for life. Service to others can take us outside of ourselves and then bring us back to the focal point of how we can make ourselves and our lives better.
If you haven't gotten the book, you need to. We still have a third part of this series called Will. The book is called The Obstacle is the Way, The Ancient Art of Turning Adversity to Advantage by Ryan Holiday. If you're not following Ryan Holiday on social media, do it. His Instagram page, he posts all the time and talks about these Stoic philosophers and their golden nuggets that can get you through the day if you're having a bad day, or motivate you if you're having a good day. It's really a great book. Ryan, our producer, is learning a little bit about Stoicism. What's the book that you're reading right now, Ryan? Yeah, he was one of the great Stoics.
Mm-hmm.
And so, there's a lot of stuff out there. I've been really impressed with this philosophy of Stoicism, and I think it has made me a better person. And like I said, the first thing I thought about when I first started reading this book, I wasn't thinking I want to read this book for as a running analogy or a running improvement book. I thought it was a self-improvement book, but I started making notes from chapter 1. Hey, this is exactly what running is all about. This will help me be a better runner. So we encourage you to get the book. It's on audio form. It's paperback. Just get the book.
Yeah, and to Don's point earlier about Audible, the Audible version is narrated by Ryan Holiday himself, which I'm always a fan of. I like when the author themselves is the one narrating, so that's always a plus.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Nation members. Get the book, then read it or listen to it, then go lace up your shoes and go out and run.
Mas.